Nobody at Phoenix International Airport knew that David Rodriguez was anything more than a reliable baggage handler. He showed up on time, did his job without complaint, and went home to his small apartment every night. The other workers called him Silent Dave because he never talked about his past, never bragged, never told war stories. What they didn't know was that before he was throwing luggage, he was throwing terrorists off boats in the Arabian Sea. And when 5 armed men decided to turn Terminal 3 into their personal battlefield, they were about to learn why some people choose silence, because their actions speak loud enough. Welcome to the Warriors Channel. Before we begin this tale of hidden courage and split-second decisions, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe that heroes walk among us in the most ordinary places, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who serve in silence. Phoenix International Airport never slept. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, planes arrived and departed, carrying millions of passengers to destinations around the world. Terminal 3 was the busiest section, handling international flights that brought people from every corner of the globe. In the cargo bay beneath the terminal, where most passengers never ventured, the real work happened. David Rodriguez had been working there for 3 years. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., he'd clock in, put on his orange safety vest, and take his position at Cargo Bay 5. He was 38 years old, medium height, with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor that made him nearly invisible among the dozens of other baggage handlers who moved through the airport like ghosts. His co-workers knew almost nothing about him. He'd started working at the airport shortly after moving to Phoenix from somewhere back east, Virginia, someone thought, though David never confirmed it. He lived alone, drove an old Toyota pickup truck, and spent his lunch breaks reading paperback novels instead of scrolling through his phone like everyone else. The supervisors loved him because he never complained, never called in sick, and never caused drama. The other workers respected him because he did his share of the heavy lifting and always helped when someone fell behind. But they all agreed on one thing. David Rodriguez was the quietest man any of them had ever met. What they didn't know was that David hadn't always been quiet. What they didn't know was that the slight scar above his left eyebrow came from a piece of shrapnel in Mogadishu. What they didn't know was that the way he always positioned himself with his back to a wall and clear sight lines to every exit wasn't a coincidence. And what they definitely didn't know was that the faded tattoo on his right forearm, usually hidden beneath his long-sleeved work shirt, told a story that would have changed how they looked at him forever. The morning of October 12th started like any other. David arrived early, checked the manifest for outbound Flight 447 to London, and began loading the cargo containers with systematic precision. He worked methodically, efficiently, the way he'd been trained to do everything, with purpose and without wasted motion. Terminal 3 was already bustling with early morning travelers. Business people heading to meetings in Europe, families starting vacations, students returning to universities abroad. The usual mix of humanity that filled airports around the world, all of them focused on their destinations, none of them paying attention to the men in orange vests who made their journeys possible. At 6:15 a.m., David was securing the last cargo container when he heard something that made him pause, not because it was loud, but because it was wrong. 5 sets of footsteps moving too fast, too coordinated, coming from the direction of the security checkpoint. He'd learned long ago to trust his instincts, and his instincts were telling him that something was about to go very wrong. Through the small window that separated the cargo bay from the main terminal, David saw them. 5 men, dressed in dark clothing, moving with military precision through the departure gate area. They weren't running, but they weren't walking like passengers either. They were moving like operators, like hunters. David's hand instinctively moved to his radio, but before he could call security, the sound of automatic gunfire echoed through the terminal. Screams followed immediately after. Through the window, he could see passengers diving for cover, airport staff running in panic, and the 5 men spreading out to control the terminal. This was it, the thing every airport worker feared but hoped would never happen. A coordinated terrorist attack in one of the busiest terminals in the country. David crouched behind a cargo container and assessed the situation. 5 attackers, probably more outside. Unknown number of hostages. Limited escape routes. Local law enforcement response time, probably 15 to 20 minutes. FBI and tactical units, at least an hour. For most people, this would be the moment to hide, to hope, to pray that someone else would handle the situation. But David Rodriguez wasn't most people. David Rodriguez was a man who had spent 8 years of his life hunting terrorists in places where backup was measured in days, not minutes. Slowly, carefully, he rolled up his right sleeve. The tattoo was there, faded but clear. An eagle perched on an anchor, surrounded by words that most civilians would never recognize. SEAL Team 6, Direct Action Unit, 2005, 2013. Below that, in smaller letters, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan. David hadn't wanted to be that man anymore. After 8 years of war, 8 years of night raids, and kill or be killed missions, he'd wanted nothing more than to disappear into civilian life, to have a normal job, a quiet existence, a chance to sleep through the night without checking for exits and threats. But as the sound of gunfire and screaming continued from the terminal above, David realized that some things never leave you. Some training runs too deep. Some responsibilities are too heavy to abandon. He moved to his equipment locker and opened it with hands that had stopped shaking 3 years ago. Inside, beneath his spare safety vest and work gloves, was something that wasn't supposed to be there, something that violated about 15 different federal regulations. A Sig Sauer P-226, the same weapon he'd carried on dozens of missions, along with 2 spare magazines. David had kept it, telling himself it was just paranoia, just old habits die hard. But deep down, he'd always known this day might come. In a world where soft targets were everywhere and evil men looked for opportunities to cause maximum damage, someone had to be ready to stand between the wolves and the sheep. He chambered around, secured the weapon, and began moving toward the stairs that led to the main terminal. As he climbed, muscle memory took over. His breathing slowed. His vision sharpened. His mind shifted into the cold, calculated focus that had kept him alive in the most dangerous places on earth. At the top of the stairs, David peered through the door's window into Terminal 3. The scene was chaos. Passengers huddled in groups, some crying, some praying, all terrified. Airport security personnel were nowhere to be seen, either down or ordered back by the attackers. The 5 terrorists had spread out across the terminal, their weapons trained on different sections of the crowd. The leader, a tall man with a beard and tactical vest, was shouting orders in accented English. "Everyone stay down. Anyone moves, anyone tries to be hero, we start shooting. This is message to your government." David studied their positions, their weapons, their behavior. Professional, but not military. Probably trained militants, but not special forces. They were confident, which meant they thought they controlled the situation. That confidence would be their weakness. He keyed his radio to the emergency frequency. This is Cargo Bay 5 to airport operations. I have eyes on 5 armed hostiles in Terminal 3. Passengers are in immediate danger. I'm going to engage. The response came immediately. Negative. Cargo Bay 5. Do not engage. Fall back and wait for law enforcement. David turned off his radio. He'd been taking orders for most of his adult life, but not today. Today, innocent people were going to die unless someone acted, and David Rodriguez had spent too many years learning how to act. He opened the door and stepped into the terminal. The first terrorist saw him almost immediately. "You! Orange vest! Get down now!" David raised his hands, walking slowly toward the center of the terminal. His weapon was concealed beneath his safety vest, invisible to the attackers. To them, he looked like just another airport worker, probably scared, definitely harmless. "Please," David said, his voice carrying just the right amount of fear. "I was just working downstairs. I don't want any trouble." The terrorist relaxed slightly, confident that this was just another civilian to control. "Smart man. You sit with others. You stay quiet. Maybe you live to see tomorrow." That's when David made his move. What happened next took exactly 11 seconds, but it would be replayed on security cameras and analyzed by counterterrorism experts for years to come. David's right hand swept his vest aside as his left foot pivoted, putting him behind the nearest pillar. The Sig Sauer appeared in his hands like magic, and his first shot took down the terrorist who had been speaking to him. Center mass, professional, final. The other 4 terrorists spun toward the sound, but David was already moving. He'd spent 8 years learning to fight in confined spaces, to use cover and concealment, to eliminate multiple targets with minimal collateral damage. This wasn't luck or adrenaline. This was training, experience, and a kind of focused violence that most people never imagined existed. The second terrorist went down as he tried to bring his weapon around. The third managed to get off a burst of automatic fire, but it went wide as David's shot found its mark. The fourth and fifth terrorists tried to use the hostages as cover, but David had been in this situation before. He knew how to wait, how to breathe, how to take the shot that mattered. By the time law enforcement arrived, it was over. 5 terrorists down, 0 civilian casualties, and a quiet man in an orange vest sitting on a bench with his hands visible, his weapon secured, waiting to explain what had happened. The FBI agents who interviewed David later that day were professionals, but even they seemed stunned by what they found when they ran his background check. 8 years in the Navy SEALs, including 4 years with the elite DevGru unit. 37 confirmed missions in 6 different countries. Citations for valor that were still classified. A service record that read like something out of a military thriller. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" the lead agent asked. "Why hide what you are?" David looked at him with tired eyes. "Because I didn't want to be what I am anymore. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to load bags and go home and not think about killing people." "But you kept the weapon." "Yeah, I kept the weapon." "Why?" David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because sheep don't protect themselves. Someone has to be ready to stand between them and the wolves. Even if that someone just wants to load luggage." The story made national news, of course. Airport worker stops terrorist attack. Hidden hero saves hundreds. Navy SEAL working as baggage handler eliminates 5 terrorists. David declined all interview requests. He went back to work the next week, same orange vest, same quiet demeanor. But things were different now. His co-workers looked at him with a mixture of awe and respect. Passengers who recognized him from the news would sometimes nod or shake his hand. Children would point and whisper to their parents about the man who stopped the bad guys. David handled it all the same way he'd handled everything else in his life, quietly, professionally, without seeking attention or praise, because that's what professionals do. They don't seek glory. They just do the job that needs to be done, whether that job is loading bags or eliminating threats to innocent people. 6 months later, David was offered positions with federal agencies, private security firms, even a book deal. He turned them all down. He liked his job at the airport. He liked the routine, the predictability, the fact that most days nothing happened that required him to be anything more than a man in an orange vest. But he kept the tattoo visible now, not because he was proud, though he was, but because sometimes the wolves needed to know that the sheep weren't unprotected. Sometimes the bad guys needed to see a reminder that there were still people willing to stand between evil and innocence, even in the most ordinary places. And sometimes, just sometimes, the hero you need isn't wearing a cape or a uniform. Sometimes he's wearing an orange safety vest and loading your luggage, waiting quietly for the moment when silence needs to become action. Because that's what warriors do. They serve. They protect. And when the time comes, they remind the world that evil can show up anywhere. But it doesn't get to win. Not on their watch. Not today. Not ever. Semper Fi.